Hello, CFP. Good evening. For perspectives today, we have Surajit Sarkar with us. He is a museum curator and an independent researcher. He is here today to talk about memory and history with us. Can we please have you on the stage, sir?
Good evening and nice to see you all here. I hope this presentation on memory and history will, it's pretty boring title, but I think it just covered two things that I wanted to talk about, memory and history. So string the two words together in a way I thought maybe could show you a connection. What are these two photographs? Let's start from there. I know this has no connection to Ahmedabad, but the photograph on the left, the caption tells you it's like residents describing memories around buildings in a village of Gumanheda in Delhi. And Delhi, I thought it was a city. So what are these villages? Anyone familiar whether if there are villages in Delhi or not? It's like the capital city and so on. Well, one of the strangest things and actually the most unusual thing about the city of Delhi is, at the time of independence, Delhi's population was 5 lakh. Today, it's like 20 crore, approximately. In 70 years, it's gone from 5 lakhs to 20 crores. So where do the people stay? Where's the land on which to build all the high-rises or bungalows or whatever else? They're all village grounds. Every single place that you know of in the city of Delhi at one time or the other was some village ground. And if any of you are familiar with villages, you'd know that a village is a place where fields are not just fields, they are fields for cultivation or for some kind of, it's like a resource to make a living. Either you forage for food or you grow it yourself, or you let your cattle out or so on and so forth, or chickens or whatever else. So the city of Delhi had about 650 villages in it at the time of independence. And today most of these villages are actually those parts of the city which are really crowded because the villagers said, we are villages, we are older than the city. So the same municipality rules cannot apply to us. So they won that. As a result, the cheapest housing in the city of Delhi is in a village. Because out there they can build 4-storied, 5-storied buildings without following municipality rules. So for students, it's a great place to live because all your friends are nearby and you pay like a quarter of the rates outside the village grounds. So villages have had their advantages, but they also have, beyond advantages, they also, if you go to the villages of Delhi, you discover parts about the city which you hardly know. Like the photograph on the right, that one. Anybody can identify this plant? Cotton. And somebody will say, cotton in Delhi, growing in someone's garden? It's a garden in this village of Gumanheda where one of the people whose parents used to grow cotton and sell them to Delhi. Delhi had many textile factories at one point of time. And that cotton used to go to those textile factories. Anyway, all of that is history now. But just to remember his parents and grandparents and how their family used to make a living, he still grows a few cotton plants in his garden. And it is following little things like this that you can identify lesser known stories of any place, whether it's the city of Delhi or whether it is anywhere else, maybe your own hometowns. And what we have to do in order to do that process is to create a dialogue with memory. something, I mean, I heard there were 250, 300 of you in Banaras some time ago. And I'd be curious to know if any of you ended up having conversations with locals who told you about what this place was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Yes, you did have those conversations. And did they say that things have always been the same or are they different? One voice, anybody? Did things change or have things always been the same in Banaras? They changed. And maybe you'll see photographs of Banaras from 20 years ago, 10 years ago. But these photographs here are of the city of Delhi. Top right photograph is from 1960. The below that is 1950s. These are all parts of town which today, like the one in the 1950 photograph, bottom right, is Chanakyapuri, where all the embassies are today. It was like entertainment area. The one on top is where now Patel Nagar, very crowded West Delhi, this is the area. The bottom photograph and the central photograph in the bottom row. It's like swimming competitions in the Yamuna river. And when I show this photograph in Delhi today, people says people could swim in that river. Like, you'd have to probably close your nose if you go past the river today. But it's true. And what's even more interesting is the river doesn't stink all the time, but I'll come to that story later. Again, told by people who live beside the river. On the right, that's a lion cub pair in a house in Nizamuddin. The year is 1970. I mean, can you keep lions as pets in your house? This lady is clearly like so comfortable with them कि खाना भी plate पे रखी हुई है सामने. I mean, and you think of a lion with food in front of it, first thought is, will they jump at the food or at me? But this person's just doing it all the time. And there on top is like the room behind the window that you can see used to be my office in Ambedkar University Delhi, which was a 500-year-old building built when Delhi was called Shahjahanabad. Emperor Shah Jahan built that city, and when he shifted his capital from Agra to Delhi. And his eldest, I think it was his second eldest son or whatever, called Dara Shikoh, used to live in this place where the university is today, and it's called the Dara Shikoh Library because that guy was like highly, well-read person. He not only knew Persian, but he also translated from Persian to Sanskrit and stuff like that. So what is happening in that photograph is like the person on the left is a musician. He's a music archivist at the Indira Gandhi Center for Arts, and he was giving us the kind of music that you could hear in Delhi in the year 1920. This is 2020. So this is some of the earliest recordings of Delhi and the music in Delhi. He found bits of that and he was playing it to an audience and telling you, in this city around the place where we are sitting today, this is the kind of music you could hear. So memory is not just visual, like these other photographs. It's also oral. Not just sentences in the way I'm speaking, but also sounds, musical sounds, all kinds of things. And you never really know what's going to get people to start talking. This photograph, like the photograph about the swimmers in the Yamuna, when we found this photograph from a house in Old Delhi in about 2013 or 14, this man was a chartered accountant. He was about 80 or so when we met him. And we got to know that when he was a really young person, I discovered later, he got a camera on his 14th birthday. His father was a munshi in some big place or whatever. So since this fellow was interested and talked about photographs, he had been given a camera on his 14th birthday. Now remember, in 1930, between 1930 and 40, there were not too many cameras and not too many young people with cameras. So, and it's something that I expect you people will immediately get, कि अरे तुम्हारे पास मोबाइल फ़ोन है ना, and you're below 15, एक काम करना उनके साथ जाके फ़ोटो खींच के आओ. Like just because you are younger doesn't necessarily make you like the automatic assistant to somebody. But in the year 2030, if you had a camera, he said, I like being an assistant because I ended up going to places at my age I could have never gone. So this was some swimming competition being organized, and one of the organizers heard of this young guy with a camera and said, Ki, why don't you come and take some photographs of the competition? So that's how we got these photographs. But today, a century later, when we look at these photographs, they mean so much more than just a competition. It tells you about the river, it tells you about the kinds of people, it tells you about the state of the ghats at the background. And what is really interesting also is that if you're in Delhi, the ghats still look more or less like this. And there'll be as few people because nobody really wants to go beside the river in Delhi. So it's still as uncrowded as you see it out here. But besides that, the water, which you don't get a sense of, is what has changed. And one of the exercises that we used at the university when we were doing kind of a people's history of the Yamuna River in Delhi was bring out as many old photographs of the river and take it around to people who lived beside it and said, do you ever remember the river like this? And like your Banaras conversations, people said, yeah, but you know, this thing was broken down in that year, or this shop was the first shop, but it's closed many years ago, which means this photograph is of before that time. And immediately, you can start mapping a story in time. So there is one way of mapping which is of place, and there is another way of mapping which is of time. And both, I mean, we don't usually think of mapping time, but using information of this kind is possible to bring in another level to the kind of mapping you create. For example, a simple question, lion pets in a person's in a domestic garden, do you think it's even legal to do this nowadays? No. So when do you think this was stopped? I mean, it became illegal to have, clearly it was legal because nobody is even bothered that a person is taking a photograph, which means it must have been legal at that time. But any idea when this would have happened? The reason I'm bringing this up is to show how photographs also tell us elements which we least expect. There was something called the Protection of Wildlife Conservation Act, 1972. In that act, one of the elements was you are prohibited from keeping certain kinds of pets, which essentially meant animals like this. And just couple of days ago, I heard a really funny story. Now, a friend of mine had just come back from Pakistan, and we were meeting after the visit. I'd gone to attend a music festival there and perform there and so on. So we were talking, and she was telling us about housing in the city of Lahore. So talked about how Lahore is like, it's got these old bungalows, it's got high-rise buildings, it's all kinds of things. But he said, that the best neighborhoods, the more, the ones with the maximum number of services, all belong to the military. So I said, oh yeah, I've heard Pakistan is military rule and so on, so the military must be having some benefits, etc., etc. And then she said, one more kind of benefit. So I said, no, it's connected to this photograph. In those military housing societies, people keep snakes as pets, alligators as pets. She said, I even heard of a tiger cub as a pet. I said, wow. 1970, 2024, 50 years ago, there was a reason why the Wildlife Conservation Act took place. It was to prevent the loss of what we call the wildlife, which stays in the forest, which is not cohabiting with human beings. But here you are having housing complexes which are allowing this to continue. What could be the consequences of that? I mean, imagine if one were to ask this lady, what would you do if the lion cub, I presume if the lion cub lived, it would grow up and it would become a lion. And lions are big. And then how much would you have to feed it every day? What would you do? And what happened if the lion was hungry and you were late with the khana? I mean, there are millions of questions I can think of asking somebody who's got a tiger cub as a pet, but maybe it was to prevent those kind of situations from happening that certain laws came up. So, to come back to the topic of memory and history, individual memories which come out of photographs like this connect up with our larger historical processes and tell you about how a larger process affects individual lives. Inko to, they would have to do something about these cubs. And what I have heard is like this particular family, because that gentleman who was the photographer who took this photograph told us that it was just a couple of years before 1972 I'd taken the photograph, and after that they had to give all the animals to Delhi Zoo. But so now if you have this information, you can go to Delhi Zoo and find out, you have a record of all the animals that came to you in 1972, and you can discover what were the different animals kept in people's houses. I mean, it's a completely different way of understanding the city you live in. But let me go to, some more of these photographs. There's that website there, delhimemories.in. I'll refer to this website again, but it has many more photographs of this kind. These are all photographs which have come from personal collections. These are all non-official photographs we collected from people who've been taking photographs in Delhi for a long time. Have a look someday. Same story, creating dialogues with memory in a very, very different setting, a very rural setting. If you look at the map, this is like literally in the center of the country, Madhya Pradesh, and this is like just south of the Narmada, central Narmada region, between the Narmada river and the Satpura hills. In that area, those dots are the place where, this was a long time ago, this was 2007, 8, 9, around that time, we tried to kind of create stories from different villages, how people from villages remember where they stay, and put it up on the website. This was much before Google Maps became the way it is today. And the process of collection, you can see the different kind of people. And one thing that may strike you, or if you're careful and look at the people who are taking the interviews, is that the people who are doing the questions are ones who probably know the language of the person who's giving the answers, which immediately means you're limiting the kind of person, the pool of people who can ask the question is going to be small, because you have to be able to talk in a dialect or a language which is familiar to the person. The people who are being talked to are old, and they are the ones who can tell you about the place, but they probably do not even, in this case, some of them wouldn't know the Hindi that you and me speak, because this is very like 21st century Hindi. So we went to their families and asked them for who are the youngest people in the family going to school, middle school, high school, and made them part of the interviewing team so that when people were who were going to be the source of information were asked the question, it was with someone they knew very well. And that's one of the really big uh, things to remember when you're talking about collecting memories. Why should somebody share their memory with you? There, I go down to Ahmedabad and I start talking to someone. If I don't know the person, after about 3 sentences, they'll wonder who this guy who's talking so much. And then, if that person is in a talkative mode, will probably say, okay, whatever question is asking, let me give the opposite answer to what is valid. So, I mean, any kind of story can emerge. The only way to kind of make sure that the person is answering your questions with a degree of, what would I call it, seriousness or gravity, is to make sure that they recognize who is asking the question. One of the most important things about interviewing is the person who's listening to your question is also not just listening to a question. That person is listening to the seriousness with which the question is asked. If they feel that you are not serious and you're just kind of filling up something, they're going to lose interest very soon. On the other hand, the best sources of information to start a conversation is people from their own families. Especially if you're going to talk to people older, then anybody who's younger would have, Nanaji, Tauji, Nani, Dadi. They know the younger people and they have probably exchanged some information with them anyway. Those bits of information become the starting point of a lot more storytelling. And storytelling then, because it is across time, is not talking about one exceptional event that happened on one day. It's talking about a length of time, about how changes have been observed and seen. They're not critical changes that happened on the day some people had to leave and go away and never came back. No, it's people who've been continuing to live there. And slowly, to give an example, this lady in the center picture on the left, she was, before there was kilogram and gram, the way grain was weighed was actually in a container called pai or sei, if you've heard these phrases before. They're containers made of bamboo, wood, sometimes brass, sometimes various materials. They are units of measure. So the question to her was, after she had pulled out the oldest and half-broken measuring container at home, the question was, what are the different grains that you have seen being poured into this and measured from when your childhood to today? And you know how the answer was given? There was a time when we had just started growing rice, and it was a few years, I remember, and then we went back. I remember there were a few years only kutki was measured in this before rice came back again. Any idea what kutki is? It's a coarse grain. It's a kind of millet. It's what was eaten. Kodo, kutki were kind of grains that were even eaten before rice was grown more widely. And like jowar bajra, the coarse grains. And when someone says that we had started growing rice and we went back to the older kind of grain for a few years and then we again came back to this, means what? Something new has just started and something has gone wrong with it. So you've gone back because you've survived. The container is still getting filled with some grain, but it's a different kind of grain. It's a coarser grain. It's a grain that needs less water. Jowar, bajra, kutki, kodo, all of these need less water than rice and wheat. And then again we come back to rice, which means there must have been a few years when there was not enough harvest of what we'd call, the food grains. And when you come across three families saying the same thing, then you know that if you started growing rice, it would be in the 60s when the Green Revolution happened. And what many of us forget is very soon after the Green Revolution happened in the 60s, there were 3 years the monsoons failed. And people couldn't go back to the new grains that had just been introduced because there was not enough water. So they went back to the older grains, which in this house was kutki and kodo. So suddenly memory and recorded history are coming together through a household utensil. The point I'm trying to make is history has this really unexpected forms of appearing in everyone's life. And oral history helps us find out the intersection between individual lives and larger histories. Here I was just talking about grain for a while, but in this, about the introduction of a language. This is a project we were doing for the last 10 years in Nagaland, eastern Nagaland, where the largest, it is the largest Naga tribe called the Konyaks. So, the photograph on the left, top left, is actually a daily diary of somebody called a Dobashi. Have you heard of this phrase before? Dobashi, 2 languages, do bhasha, a translator for the administrator, the colonial administrator. This is a diary from 1920 and 30, which the grandson, who himself is like in his 60s today, is kept of his grandfather, who was the first literate person in that tribe. And because he was the first literate person, he immediately got a job. The job was to be the translator for the English people who were the administrators. And one of his jobs was every day in the evening he had to sit and make a noting of what were the, administrative things he did that day. And you can't read the text on it very easily, but I'm struck by some of them because apparently there's a practice called headhunting, used to be in Nagaland, in which rival villages and tribes fought with each other and basically cut off your head and then hung it outside the village to show that there was some jhagda we had and we won the battle, which is why the head is out here. So the English did not want this kind of practice to continue. So they instituted a system of fines. Every time there was a case of headhunting, the administrator in the Dobashi went and his diary notes down, this village was collectively fined 12 rupees for this headhunting incident that came to our notice and we found out. But then a headhunting incident is 12 rupees. And in another case, an elder tree was cut down. And one tree, the fine was 15 rupees. And you suddenly realize that 100 years ago, people valued trees sometimes more than human life. Because the elder is a very, we all say, hear this thing, ped lagao, deforestation crisis and this and that and the other. But people have been aware of the importance of trees in all cultures for a very long time. And a very unusual way of discovering this was to find the differential fines between a human life and the cutting of a tree in Nagaland. Suddenly you're seeing your recording memory. This is not an official document. This is a person's daily diary which is kept in his house and his children have just kept sitting on it. It's telling us what daily life was like in 1920s and 30s, 100 years ago. And you're discovering that even then, environment was given a kind of respect which we think is now only very recent. It isn't. There is this video. It's a video from 1970 of a person doing a dance with a skull. If you look at the house behind this person, you'll find this. It's in front of the common longhouse for men, and if you, oops, sorry, if you, sorry, if you look at the back, you'll find a whole row of these skulls. So even before, this photograph was taken in 1970, but those skulls and things in the back are even like maybe hundreds of years older. They're just preserved there. But why are they being preserved? It's like some kind of, it's like when people get medals, right, in battle. So it's like collective medal giving. So this is, in a sense, it's like the village's identity as like a brave village or whatever else. But more than that, this is a village called Chui. And this photograph was taken by this anthropologist called Furon Heimendorf in 1970, this video. Those days it was cine film 16mm. And it was transferred to video and given to me when I went to Cambridge, saying that since you're working in this area, why don't you go and, I said I want to go and show it in the village. It was shot like 50 years ago. So when I went to the village and this video was played, do you know what people started talking about for the next 15 minutes? Which talks about what memory remembers. There was like immense conversation after this little 15-second clip was played. It was all happening in Konyak. I don't know the language. So after a while, when the conversation kind of continued, I asked, so what were people talking about? What are they talking about? They say, actually, even we are surprised. I said, why? Because they're not talking about the dance. They're talking about whose house it is. They're talking about, because if a film camera came and took a photograph outside somebody's house in the year 1970, that house must have had a status within the village. Today, because no house has a wall like that anymore, maybe the odd time you see a skull or something, but you don't see it like this. So everyone's trying to guess whose house that is. And if you can notice the clip, the camera turns, so there are two views of that wall. And it was a conversation that went on for about half an hour, inconclusively. People couldn't make out. But in the process, we learned about the various visitors, quote unquote researchers, who had come to that village for the last 70 years. And what they were researching. It was like completely unexpected turn to the conversation, which as a person who was an academic, it was really interesting to see what was the shift in the research topic that was happening over time. So places, objects, people, memory can connect up really unexpected things. Remember that, and maybe in your conversations in Banaras or even in your hometown, you'll be getting some of those. But anyway, so to summarize the kind of information that you can collect, it's not just speech, it's also photographs. Photographs not necessarily of big buildings, but also smaller things, objects, sounds, recordings. And nowadays one of the things that's also emerging is many people who've been working in the film industry, they're to kind of get a sense of the kind of music that is happening in a place, look for old recordings of music from different parts of the country. And that is a great source of information, because when you play those some of those are available online in various sites. There's one site I know called pad.ma, which is a great resource for looking at old film clips. And if you get sound from there and play it in a particular, the source of that, where that recording was done, you can have really interesting conversation about the kind of music, the kind of songs, a whole range of other ways to understand history emerges. Smells, one of the least talked about, but really powerful when you talk about it. I mean, smells are something which are not only seasonal, they also change. People say the rice doesn't smell like when I was a child. The rice you cook, it starts from there. And if you're interested, you can start with that starting point to have a conversation not only about rice, but what all got cooked in the kitchen that was really fragrant. And try and see how many fragrant foods are there in a kitchen today as opposed to your mother's time, your grandmother's time. Where did all those foods come from? You've heard of this chili called Bhut Jalokia from Assam. So again, there is a group called, it's called the Indian Culinary Agenda. I think they have a website also. But anyway, so they are doing these pieces of writing and conversations around the way our kitchens have changed. And one of the really interesting conversations I had with one of the researchers from that group was, who belongs to the community where Bhut Jalokia originally grew. She says, now when I go to the market and I come with friends from other places and first thing they want is to buy chili in Assam and they want to buy Bhut Jalokia, and I keep my mouth shut because I see them buying it, and once I asked the lady who was selling it, so is this something you eat at home? And that lady kind of just scoffed and said, nah, I won't eat these chilies. So she said, but you're selling it as Bhut Jalokia, why won't you eat it? She said, there is so much demand for Bhut Jalokia, now we don't know where to grow it. So anything that is approximating Bhut Jalokia in terms of looks is all coming under the whole idea of Bhut Jalokia. This particular variety which I'm selling you today is what we used to feed our cattle when they were having when they were wheezing. In order to clear their basically lungs and all, you feed them that chili. I'm saying, my God, do you know how powerful that chili is? If it can cure a cattle, a human being is going to go boof. Like, it makes sense. And for people like us who don't know what powerful chili is, maybe it'll be an experience. But it is not Bhut Jalokia. The story is then, what is Bhut Jalokia? That is a story in itself. And what passes off for it. So much of what is contemporary history is actually I wouldn't use the word moderation, I'd call it's an amalgamation of lots of different things which otherwise wouldn't come together. But because contemporary history is such a homogeneous thing, a lot of different things have kind of been joined together. And to me, this Bhut Jalokia incident was a classical case of how that happens. Many things which are not have become. But these are the varieties and the kind of themes around which you can go. Roti, kapda, makan, jal, jangal, zameen. These 6, between them, can actually make up for many hours of conversation. And I found this a very useful way to kind of continue a conversation in a place where I would like to kind of spend some more time, find out a little more about how things change there, and so on and so forth. So this kind of background research before you go to a place, to know where you're going and what you're going to be entering, before you go and start talking about Bhut Jalokia or whatever else, think about your own experience. Remember, in any conversation, even amongst friends, if you want your friend to share something really intimate, really a very personal memory, they have to know that they are not making themselves vulnerable. So we often, without knowing it, actually make ourselves also vulnerable. We share like very personal incidents or encounters with them, and that kind of starts the process of exchange. It's the same thing with any oral history interview. And but the kind of encounter you have to share is to show that I don't know everything that you know, but I know other things, and I'm willing to share some things which could be like the first time I came to this town, and the next day my stomach was upset, and 9 times out of 10, if the people you're talking to will say, "Oh yes, that happens to a lot of people who come from cities." Especially if you're going to a small town or a village. Why would somebody say that? Have you ever thought about what is the difference in the water quality in a town and a village? A town water is purified, chlorinated, God knows what else has been done to it. And our systems are used to it. So when we get water which is just out of the ground, without all these additions to it, it kind of our system says, oops, what is that? Somewhere it's water, but it doesn't have the other things that I'm used to. So really, to us, what seems inconsequential or a little something that I don't want to share can become something which can be very valuable because you're sharing such a personal act, personal encounter with whatever it is in a new place. Or you come with some bit of information that you are sure more than you, they'll be looking at this or thinking about this bit of information you shared. Before I start this video, I'll just finish that conversation. Do you remember this village, Gomanheda? Yeah, in Delhi. So in Delhi, we did these neighborhood museums, one every year at the university, and then we started the village history. So this was the first village history exhibition that we had created. Hamara Gomanheda. So this was a village history exhibition that we'd put up in the village. And I wanted people to look at their own village in a very different way. So I got the researchers in the university to kind of see what references to Gomanheda has been there in media in the last 50 or 60 years. And is any one of them really interesting? Turns out, in the year 1975, Gomanheda is just after Palam Airport, which is like the big international airport in Delhi, right? So one Air Force plane took off from Palam Airport and crashed in the fields of Gomanheda. And the next day in the local newspapers, Times of India, Hindustan Times, there was a photograph of this crashed plane in the field. So we immediately made a print of that and took it to the village and said, do any of you remember in whose field this landed up? Immediately, all the older people in the village said, we remember. And then they started talking to each other. Remember how we came running? And there was this one parachute coming and it landed on the other side of the canal. And the canal was what we now call the Najafgarh drain. It was called there was a name. It was a tributary from the Aravalis down to Yamuna. But over time it has become a drain because it's called a drain because essentially cities refuse goes into it. But here people were talking of a time when it was not a drain. And this one photograph, after that we didn't really actually have to start a conversation. The conversation was between them, triggered by this one visual memory. So triggering memory is like a really important thing when you want to know local histories. And this little 2-minute film tells you how we did it in the Imphal Valley. The background to this, like it says, this monsoon, Imphal Valley has got 3 rivers coming into it and 1 river going out. So if it rains too much, that place gets really flooded. And it's not new because of 3 rivers, they're not rivers made yesterday. They've been here since God knows when. So it's an experience human beings have and have lived with. So I'll first show you this 2-minute clip and then we'll talk about it.
ꯃꯁꯤꯡꯁꯤ ꯊꯝꯕ ꯂꯣꯏꯁꯤꯜꯂꯛꯄ ꯃꯇꯝꯗ ꯄꯣꯠ ꯆꯩ ꯐꯠꯇ ꯍꯥꯎꯊꯤ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯁꯤ ꯀꯗꯥꯏꯗ ꯊꯝꯒꯗꯒꯦ ꯍꯥꯎꯊꯤꯗꯤ ꯊꯝꯐꯝ ꯂꯩꯇꯗꯅ ꯑꯀꯣꯏꯕꯁꯤꯗ ꯂꯩꯔꯤꯕ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯁꯤ ꯄꯨꯊꯣꯛꯅꯔ ꯁ꯭ꯋꯥꯏꯗ
ꯃꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯕ ꯁꯃꯁ꯭ꯌꯥꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯒꯤ ꯏꯁꯣꯔꯅꯦꯅ ꯂꯩꯖꯔꯤꯕ ꯏꯆꯦꯕꯨꯅ ꯇꯥꯛꯄꯤꯁꯤꯟꯕꯤꯕꯒꯤꯗꯃꯛꯇ ꯂꯣꯏꯅ ꯁꯨꯅ ꯑꯗꯨꯕꯨ ꯃꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯍꯧꯖꯤꯛ ꯃꯦꯇꯤꯡ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯍꯌꯦꯡ ꯅꯣꯡꯉꯥꯜꯂꯛꯇ ꯂꯩꯔꯝꯅꯤ ꯑꯃ ꯀꯂꯝꯒꯤ ꯑꯃꯗꯤ
Okay, so after you collect your first set of background research and some oral interviews, because we're talking in a place, it's really important, I've always maintained, and I think it really makes sense, that you show the people who've been your contributors what you're doing with this contribution. People have to, I mean, if you want to kind of make it a relationship that will continue over time, that if you ever were to come back, they would still welcome you. You need to tell them what you're going to do with this information. So for me, one really important thing has been creating public exhibitions locally of this information. And it doesn't take a lot to do. Like here, as you can see, it's like this program started in the market. Moment the sun goes down, the market empties. So you use that same marketplace, put up a video screen, projector. It's almost like a live show. So you have a actual video camera connected, and anybody is talking, their face comes on the screen. That's interspersed with some videos and interviews that have been taken there earlier on. And people are commenting about what they see and have talked about. And the issue, in which in this case was the flooding and the confrontation between different neighborhoods. Because every time one neighborhood wanted to stop the water coming into it, they would put up sandbags. But water is water. If it's block it here, it'll go somewhere else. And it goes into the next neighborhood. And they say they want to put up something, or they kind of get, people who were burning cars. Which is why somebody asked me from there, you do this theater work and all, folk theater and things, why don't you come and create some public performances where people can talk about this problem rather than burning cars? It's a good starting point. How to create a kind of collective platform for a platform for collective conversation rather than whatever. So in this, one of the things you may not have understood is when that lady in white came on, she's Binodini Devi, used to be the Rani of Imphal those days, was also like a well-known writer and so on. She belongs to the royal family, and when she had heard of our work, she had said, why don't you come and see the library at home? Maybe you'll find something about flooding from these old books. And sure enough, background research. Even though I don't know the language, one had a local group of 3-4 friends. I told them, like, dude, why don't you do one thing? I'm not going to go there. You fellows go to catch some more, because we don't have too much time to do this work. Look at all the books in the library which talk about the locality, talk about the valley. Start. And then what about the valley? So water in the valley or flooding in the valley. You can quickly go through all the books. And we came across this piece of writing called the Tooth and Long, 400-year-old documentation of flooding and waterways in the Imphal Valley. One of the upshot of this whole series of, because this exhibition moved from through different parts of the valley, one village, part of town, so on and so forth. By the second time we did the shows, the municipal department, the city municipality was told to send its engineers to come and listen to what was written in those documents of 400 years. Not read, listen. and then see how you can apply it today. I mean, you don't know what the fallout of this connecting memories and history is going to be always. Sometimes it's far more than you can even imagine. When you start out, I mean, I had no clue. Most of us had no clue when we got into all this. So here is a similar kind of thing, this time in Madhya Pradesh, in which all we are trying to do is track farming changes in the district of Hoshangabad. So we are going, like I showed you earlier, that map with those little, some dots on it. Those dots were some of the villages from where people had talked about 2 or 3 things. They talked about the kind of grain, they talked about the water use, and they talked about what we don't classify as food but very much is food, that is food collected from trees or found in the forest. You know, just for what you call foraged foods, which is actually sometimes a very large proportion of the food you eat. Except we never, in our thinking about food, we don't think about it. So, while the collection was done, one of the kind of, over time one realized when you do public exhibitions of these collections, everybody feel, lots of local people feel nobody came and asked me, हमें तो पूछा ही नहीं आपने. And they kind of say, हमारे पास ये पड़ा हुआ है, you never, we would have shown you these photographs or this book or something. All kinds of things come up. And so this
घूम गई है, वो गंदे नाले में तब्दील हो गई है. ये ज्यादा पुरानी बात नहीं है, 135 साल पुरानी बातें हैं. 80-90 फीट ऊपर हमको भाग आने वाली पीढ़ियों को क्या देकर जाएंगे, इस पर उद्धार करने के लिए, इस गंभीर प्रश्न पर उद्धार करने के लिए हमने आज ये हम नदियों को जहरीला बना रहे हैं और अपनी उपासना को भी हम जहरीला बना रहे हैं. मीडिया प्रोजेक्टर और अपने साथियों की कला के द्वारा उठाया है. आज का समय आज से 10 साल पहले अधिकार किसका हो,
तो वो मशीन दिखा रहे थे मकान लियो
नो एंट्री. तुम पागलों की बातों में फंस गए तेरा.
अरे बाबूजी नमस्ते. अरे नदियाँ हेरा गई
से मतलब क्या?
अरे साहब
जी दत्ता कह रहे हैं. हाँ सुनील जी आप सुन रहे हैं मुझे? जी दत्ता कह रहे हैं कि नदियाँ इस गाँव में थी और 10 साल से उन्होंने नदियाँ को देखा है. मेरे साथ उस गाँव के सरपंच भी यहाँ मौजूद है. अपने आप
So as you can see again, it's like by this time I had gotten used to the idea of bringing in video in public exhibition, make it like a live show kind of thing. All of that is good, but here, for a change, the research and the information collection was not done by me and the 3 or 4 others who would come with me. We just cast 5 different cultural groups in town. One was a set of singers, one was a theater group, one set of people who used to paint and do calligraphy and that kind of thing. So we asked people who knew the town, who belonged there, to talk on one topic, and that was Nadia Hiragai. The river is lost. There used to be a river in town. Now there's still a bridge across that river, but there is no river. Only in the rainy season you see some water in it, otherwise you don't. So we asked these local cultural groups, give us your take on Nadia Hiragai, and let's make that the topic of this street performances that we'll be doing. And we literally did it across the district in about 5 places over a fortnight. I think it was a Navratri fortnight. We just went around. इसीलिए मतलब नवरात्रि because भीड़ बहुत होती है. So we know a lot of public is going to come, see, talk about it, and so on and so forth. We also did one of the shows was in the ghats of the Narmada, and that was really crowded because it was ghats at Narmada. Anyway, because we are talking to people who are working with local culture, their insights and the kind of information they brought forward not only was probably new to much of the audience, but more than that, having the live video actually started conversations between people right there on the street in this show, after the show basically. And we made sure like you have a Q&A after a talk like this. It was like a Q&A between the performers and anybody else who wants to talk, or between different groups. One of the upshots of that was, I'll come to that later in the evening what happened, but maybe in the next 10 minutes. But Madhya Pradesh and Piparia will reappear. These photographs are pretty self-explanatory. The top 3, that's a touchscreen in the year 2009. Only a few ATMs had this at that point of time. Touchscreens weren't common. So we got a touchscreen and did the map of the district and got things to, show. And that was the other thing is a tent in which you set up a camera as a sensor. So anybody walked into the tent, the video started playing. Otherwise, it was a lot of to the red. So when the light came in through the red, it kind of made a very interesting, unusual feel. So it drew people in. But the moment you walked in, a film started playing. So just different ways to kind of get people involved in this public space. Here is some artists who are kind of creating, jungle ki kahaniya. So inside an auditorium, which was actually like a badminton court in Bhopal, they made this real indoor jungle. And the stories of this district were told in different ways out here. Anyway, so this is a neighborhood museum in Delhi. This iteration of the similar kind of public telling of oral histories, which is not just a telling of your collection, but also it becomes the starting point of a whole new set of collections.
Prize in which a whole lot of people have come together and have contributed their time and talent and energy and so on. What the museum has is, of course, there are panels with photographs and text, and the text has been put together largely on the basis of lots of interviews done with local residents by the actors of Jannaट्य Manch and others. Alongside that, we also have some artifacts which the local residents have lent us, which are on display here. For instance, that radio that you see behind me. This museum came about because for several years, some of us in Jannaट्य Manch have been talking to Surajit Sarkar, who's a video artist, filmmaker, activist and so on. Shuro has been doing a whole lot of projects around ideas of local history, oral narratives, people's memories and so on. And we've been talking to him about doing something in Delhi around these themes. Shadipur is still fairly well known, but Khampur is not known at all. Guru Nanak Nagar is not known at all, and so on. So these areas of Delhi which are not very well known, to which no tourist comes, no outsiders come here unless they have some work here. The fact that these areas, these villages were being highlighted in some way was tremendously exciting for a lot of people.
When I was going out with the teams who were doing the research or whatever, they were talking to the locals. I did not, imagine that it would come out so well.
मुझे पता लगा कि हमारे घर के बारे में म्यूजियम में लगा हुआ है और उसका उद्घाटन है, मुझे बड़ी खुशी हुई। एक दिल में बहुत प्रसन्नता हुई कि हमारे धरोहर को कोई म्यूजियम में भी दिखा सकता है।
The response to the museum has been quite amazing actually.
So that's the last of the video clips. But if you see this one is Shadi Khampur 2013. The ones on top are from Nizamuddin in 2016, 15 or 16. So every year the center created one neighborhood museum in one neighborhood, selected neighborhood in town, spend about 3 to 4 months talking to people there, put up an exhibition like this, did some cultural, every neighborhood is people who kind of sing, dance, do something or the other, make films. So get some of the local residents who also are people who are interested in the city, interested in the place they live in, to talk about what they've discovered about the place. And this top right photograph, if you see, that one is actually a TV screen with a USB. All that was happening is, like I told you earlier, once these things started, everybody started coming. You never came and asked us. We have stuff. I said, please put on this pen drive and we will put up your photograph. So in fact, it was a museum in which every day a whole new collection was coming together. And this has been one of the ways this DelhiMemories.in, Memories of Delhi photo website, has got its photographs. It's got it from getting people get excited when they see what it's being used for. And in this case, when you can show people that what you're sharing is not something we're going to misuse, it's going to feed into your own, the way your mind works, how you imagine your place, the place where you live. You just get more kind of connect. You get more people wanting to kind of be part of that process. So besides these live shows, I call them shows, events of oral history. Oral history is also collected, like Hamara Gomaneda was the name of the local history exhibition in this Gomaneda village. And Piparia is this book which is available on Amazon in Hindi. That same town of Piparia, it's an interview with 120 people about this town did not exist before the railways. It was set up as the railhead. Have you heard of this place called Pachmadi in Madhya Pradesh? Like hill station. So the railway line where you have to get off to go up to Pachmadi, that town is Piparia. The same town. Right? And because it's in a place which has got both administrative and now it's a very rich, fertile farmland, it's one of the largest agro-commercial centers of the state. So this is in fact an oral history of that town and how it got set up. And one of the most exciting parts about this collection was the collection of photographs. However small a town is, there will be always some photo studio, some railway person, somebody who came and took photographs. And your photographs go back in time. You just have to spend enough time, and which is why if you work with people who live there, not only do you get history which is checked and rechecked without you having to enter into it, but also you get access to other forms of history and memory, which you otherwise may not have access to. And now, before we wind up, this is something I'm doing currently in Kerala. at a museum called the Kerala History Museum at Kochi. Kerala is the difference between Kerala and most other states is it's amazing the degree of literacy, not just today, but even 2 generations ago was very high compared to the rest of the country. Therefore, people have memories not just in their mind, but in a letter written to someone or something. We are trying to collect all of that into stories which make sense for a whole lot of Malayalis. Stories about how school holidays changed over the years, or about how, a lot of people are in rubber plantations, so there's stories about families who are engaged in rubber, whether as planters or as workers, what's happening to them. Before coaching centers was parallel and tutorial colleges in Kerala, something I didn't know at all before I went there. This is like coaching centers 50 years before coaching centers. And the story why it got set up is really interesting. But so you can go to this keralamuseum.org, go to the journal archive, and you'll see some of these stories, and more are getting added there as they happen. So it's just a different way of how oral histories are collected and told. Very different from the previous ones. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, sir. Thank you. That was wonderful. Uh, I just had, I was curious about something. In your interactions in recording oral history, is this a trend that you notice? Do you think that there is firstly, a dilution in the oral history as generations pass by, and whether you think the younger generations do not have that relatability to the history that is passed down? And if yes, how do you make an effort not just to record these oral histories, but also try to generate empathy among the youth for that history?
See, oral history is my memory, right? And the memory of someone who's 15 and 55 is going to be different. So it's not that I expect immediately people will get it. So this whole younger generation, older, it's like all older generations say these young people are different, and younger people say these old people don't understand what we're talking about. It's this part of the same logic, right? But the point is there are always crossover points, and which is why when you can pin oral history down to an item of jewelry, a food that you eat, a book, even the car that's lying in the corner of the street for the last, ever since I've seen it, that car has always been there. What is it? Where does it come from? Oral history doesn't have to be from something which is very consequential. It can begin from anywhere. And that anywhereness of it is what allows different generations to connect. So to answer your question, if you think of oral history as history, that's going to be a problem. But if you think of it as stories we can connect to, that's not going to be a problem. We talk to our grandparents and we find things to talk about. That's never going to be a problem. The problem is, please don't think of it as history. Think of it, that's why I bring the word memory in. Tickle the memory, get people to get excited about something that they want to talk about. History will come in, because if we have lived a life, we've lived history. We are all parts of history. We don't realize it half the time, but the fact that the language we are speaking today is a consequence of many years of history. And then if we talk to our parents and our grandparents, before that we'll see how, like we're talking English right now, in our parents' time and our grandparents' time, where was the status of English? Who used it? In what context? To make it what it is today. So don't think of it as history ever.
Okay, yeah.
people are like pretty tired and there's an exciting weekend coming up. So, घर जाना होगा. So, thanks very much once again. And I will share some links with you and maybe you can just pass it to the students in the group. There's some really interesting ones. For rural India, there's a really interesting archive called People's Archive of Rural India. Are you familiar with it? PRI. Have a look at that website because it tells you the different ways history is told. So I just wanted to bring that into mind. And the websites that I've brought in out here, I'll give those links once again. Lastly, thank you. Yes.
Sorry. So I have this thought because your presentation, which I loved, reminded me of the conversations I used to have with my grandparents. And it's a very interesting thing that I've noticed with other people as well, that you can start somewhere, wherever it is that you start, but at some point the conversation will take a turn. And once a particular story starts, you know exactly where that story is going to lead, and it takes the same steps. And sometimes if you have the same kind of grandparents, it's the same words that are spoken. And sometimes if your grandmother pauses to breathe or something, you can actually, say the sentence that she's going to say. Right? Is that a familiar thing? So I was wondering how that works and how you're able to maybe identify, or if it matters for you, to identify stories which have been told often to many people and how those make it into what gets recorded. But also I was wondering how that might be different when you get someone from within the same family or community to do that conversation versus when a stranger is having that conversation.
Well, if you get people from similar kind of background to have the conversation, and a stranger, one of the first things you can be pretty sure of is something new is going to be there. The point is, how do you bring that element of difference into the conversation? One is, I use props, like a photograph or a audio bite on my phone, which I can kind of play and say, have you ever heard this before? These are usually very, and it's usually stuff that I've connected with somebody from the same place that I would like to find out more about. And if the resource one is using as a trigger is from that same locality, the chances are people who are older will remember it. Also, one thing in our favor is that recorded media, whether it's sound or photograph, was not so common before 1980. So, if there is something you've got from 1980 and earlier, chances are many people of that time have seen that photograph, or they have heard of it in some context. And they will be reminded when you show them that same photograph. Like that 1970 clip from Chui village in Nagaland. I mean, I think it was the only time anybody came with a film camera to that village. I think maybe 20, 30 years before or 20, 30 years after. But because of that, everyone remembered the incident, but couldn't remember where it was shot. And the whole conversation about, they were trying to make totally unexpectedly, what was the hierarchy of families in the village in that year that led to the choice of this place. So that was the entire discussion. This is not what would cross somebody's mind. I have no idea of how village dynamics are, but that's what the whole conversation is about, which people who knew the language were kind of telling me. So one of the kind of strengths of recordings is that if you can go back, this background research, go back and find something from that period of time you want to talk about, which belongs to that era, and then bring it up in conversation, will generate a completely unexpected, will bring an unexpected turn and new information into it. And nowadays, because of the internet, there is lots of access. I mean, if you search hard enough, you can get lots of interesting material. you then.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. And thank you for being a lovely audience. You're free to go. Have a happy weekend. Happy Holi.